He was sitting at the head of a long mahogany table in a room with no windows, fingers pressed flat against the wood, listening. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the size of the house. Not the guards standing at the door, with their arms crossed like statues. Not the silence that felt older than the walls. He was listening for her footsteps. Her name was Naomi Adeyemi. She was 31 years old. She had been hired 3 weeks ago through an agency in Riverside, told only that the position was for a senior housekeeper in a private estate, that the pay was 3 times the going rate, and that she should not ask questions about the household. She had taken the job because her mother's dialysis treatments were running $4,000 a month, and the math had stopped working in January. She had not been told her employer was blind. She had not been told he was Vincent Caruso. The name meant something in certain rooms. In courtrooms, it was spoken carefully, with paperwork to back every word. In federal reports, it appeared beside numbers that had too many zeros. In the neighborhoods along the eastern waterfront, it was rarely spoken above a whisper, and always with the understanding that the man himself was untouchable, not because he was clever, though he was, but because there was never enough that could be proven to close the door on him permanently. He had been blind for 4 years. A car that left the road at speed. There was an investigation. There were no charges. Everyone understood what that meant. When Naomi stopped walking, the room held still. "You're not wearing perfume," he said. Not a greeting. An observation. "No," she said. The last 3 applicants wore perfume. The first smelled like a department store. The second like she'd walked through a garden. The third, he tilted his head slightly. The third was trying to impress someone. Naomi said nothing. He turned his face in her direction. His eyes were pale gray and completely still. They did not track her. They did not blink the way eyes do when they are searching. They simply rested in the direction of her voice. "You came from the east," he said. "There's salt on you. Wind off the water." "I took the coastal route," she said. "Why?" The highway was backed up. A pause. He was still listening. Not to her words. To something underneath them. "The agency said you have references. 7 years in private households. 2 in corporate hospitality." "That's not what I asked." She understood the distinction. "The references are real. You can call any of them." He already had. She didn't know this yet. He had called each reference 2 days before her interview and asked questions that had nothing to do with her cleaning ability. He had asked whether she ever entered a room without knocking. He had asked whether she made excuses. He had asked whether she had ever, in their direct observation, lied to protect herself from blame. Each person had said no. One of them had laughed a little when asked, as if the question were strange. He hired her that afternoon. She was given a room in the East Wing, a list of daily duties, and a single standing instruction that the head of household, a man named Dario Fexai who had been with Vincent for 11 years, delivered in the tone of someone who had explained it many times before. He does not want to be guided. He does not want to be helped unless he asks. He does not want anyone in his study between 11 and 2. If something breaks or spills or falls in his presence, you wait. You do not rush to fix it. You wait for him to tell you. Naomi looked at Dario. He was in his late 50s, with the careful posture of someone who had learned, a long time ago, to take up as little space as possible. "What if he's hurt?" she asked. Dario's expression did not change. "He does not get hurt." She spent her first full week learning the house. Not just where things were, but how they sounded. The third stair from the top had a particular creak. The kitchen door swung too fast if you let it. The hallway between the dining room and the East Library had a narrow stretch where a person walking quickly would brush the console table and set the crystal bowl humming. Vincent navigated all of it without a cane, without hesitation, and without ever looking rushed. He moved through the house like a man who had memorized every inch of it under different circumstances and then chosen to honor those memories precisely. On the 9th day, he walked into the kitchen while she was reorganizing the spice shelf. She had moved 6 jars. He stopped in the doorway. "Something's different in here," he said. She kept her hands still. "I reorganized the spices. Alphabetically, by the first letter of the common name rather than the botanical name. I can put them back." He didn't answer immediately. She had already learned that his silences were not empty. "Leave it," he said finally. She exhaled quietly. "But tell me when you change anything," he said. "In any room I use. You don't need permission. I just need to know." "Understood." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You're not afraid of me." It was not entirely a question. "I'm careful," she said. He thought about that for a moment and then walked out. She heard his footsteps cross the hall and descend toward his study, unhurried, precise. She picked up the next jar and placed it in its new position. What she did not say, and what she spent considerable effort not to think about while she was in that house, was that she had done her own research 3 days before her interview. She knew what his name was attached to. She knew about the federal investigations and the outcomes that never came. She knew about the men who had worked for him who had later disappeared from public record entirely. She knew about a neighborhood on the east side of the city where 3 blocks of small businesses had closed in a single year after failing to reach an accommodation with a development company whose parent corporation existed in a jurisdiction that required very little transparency. She had taken the job anyway because her mother needed dialysis and the math still didn't work. She had not told herself it was fine. She had told herself it was necessary and that those were different things. That distinction would become harder to maintain. In the 3rd week, there was an incident in the garden. Naomi had been trimming the box hedge along the south wall, which was part of her responsibilities on Tuesdays. She had worked her way along one side and was reaching to cut a section near the corner when she heard voices from the far end of the property, near the iron gate. There were 3 men. 2 she recognized as part of the regular rotation of security, faces without names, as far as she had been told. The 3rd she did not recognize. The 3rd man was talking with a particular quality of desperation that she had heard before in other contexts, and the 2 security men were not responding to what he was saying. They were responding to the instruction they had already been given. She did not know what happened after she turned away. She heard a sound, brief, conclusive, and then nothing. That evening, she set the dinner table with the usual precision. Vincent was in his chair. Dario stood near the sideboard. She poured water, without spilling. She placed the salad fork at the correct angle. She was aware of her own steadiness in a way that made her slightly uneasy about what it said. After dinner, as she was clearing, Vincent spoke. "What did you hear in the garden today?" She stacked the plates carefully. Men talking. And after. A sound. And then. Nothing. He picked up his wine glass and held it. "You continued working." "Yes." He said nothing for a moment. "Dario tells me you've been here before. In some form." She turned to face him, holding the plates. "What do you mean?" "He means you're not someone to whom this is entirely new." Vincent set the glass down. "Not the specifics. The shape of it." She thought about her father's neighborhood. She thought about the men who came to the corner store on Fridays, and the way her mother had taught her to become very busy with something else on those afternoons. She thought about the understanding that certain questions were not worth the cost of the answer. "Everyone comes from somewhere," she said. He turned his face toward her. "Yes," he said. "That's right." She carried the plates to the kitchen and said nothing else. She thought about what it meant that he had asked and what it meant that she had answered, and whether those were the same conversation. She decided they were not. In the 6th week, a woman arrived at the house. She came on a Wednesday, which was unusual. Most of Vincent's visitors came between Monday and Thursday, but this one arrived without being announced in the household schedule, which Naomi maintained. She was thin, stylishly dressed, somewhere around 40. With a particular kind of composure that comes from extensive practice rather than ease. Her name, Naomi learned from Dario, was Celeste. Beyond that, Dario offered nothing. Naomi brought coffee to the sitting room, where Vincent and Celeste were seated across from each other with a small table between them. She poured without looking at either of them directly, which was her trained instinct, but the room had a quality of controlled tension that she registered the way you register a temperature change. "She's new," Celeste said, after Naomi straightened up. 6 weeks, Vincent said. "From the agency." "From the agency." Celeste looked at Naomi with an expression that was not hostile, but was measuring. "You can leave the pot," she said. Naomi left the pot and walked out. In the hallway, she moved slowly toward the kitchen, making no effort to be silent, which was her habit in corridors. She heard nothing further from the room. The door was solid. That afternoon, when Celeste had gone, Naomi found a small ivory card on the side table near the sitting room entrance. She wasn't sure if it had been left deliberately or dropped. She picked it up. It had a name on it and a phone number, handwritten on the back. She brought it to Dario. He looked at it for a moment. Set it in the study, he said. Left drawer.
She did.
She did not look at the name again, but she had already read it on the first pass because she had learned, a long time before she ever worked in private households, that paying attention to what you were not supposed to notice was how you stayed safe. The name on the card was a federal investigator. She put this information into the part of her mind where she kept things that required time to understand. 2 days later, Vincent asked her to come to the study. She knocked. He told her to enter. He was at his desk, hands flat again, in that listening posture.
There was a phone face-up on the desk.
She could see it had not been used recently. The screen was dark. Dario says you brought the card in without reading it, he said. She stood still. I'm not sure what card you're referring to. A pause. That's a careful answer. It's an accurate one. He said nothing for a long moment. The woman who came on Wednesday, he said. She was not a friend. I understood that. She comes every few months. She asks questions. She presents herself as though the questions don't matter. Naomi waited. What she's looking for, he said, she won't find. He said it calmly, without emphasis. It was the kind of statement that was meant to be taken as fact rather than reassurance. I'm the housekeeper, Naomi said. Yes, he said. I know what you are. She could not entirely read what he meant by that, and she had learned not to ask for clarification when it might cost her more than the confusion. She excused herself and went back to work. That night, in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and calculated. She had been there 6 weeks and 3 days. Her mother's next treatment was Friday. The payment she had sent 2 weeks ago would cover it. The one after would be covered by next month's salary, assuming nothing changed. She was doing what she needed to do. She was keeping track of what she saw. She was staying inside the lines of what was expected of her. She was not asking questions. She told herself this was enough. It was not entirely true. On the 51st day, something shifted. Vincent did not come to breakfast. This was unusual. In 7 weeks, she had never known him to miss a meal without Dario announcing it. She set the table at the usual time, waited the usual interval, and then went to find Dario. Dario was standing in the corridor outside the study, very still. Is he unwell? She asked.
Leave the food, Dario said.
She went back to the kitchen. An hour later, she heard raised voices from the direction of the east parlor, a room that was almost never used. 2 voices. She recognized Vincent's. The other was lower, with an accent she couldn't place from that distance. Then one voice. Then nothing. At lunch, she brought a tray to the study, knocked, and entered. Vincent was at the desk. His jacket was different from the one he'd been wearing in the morning. She noticed this because she managed his wardrobe and knew every item in it. There was a small cut on his left hand, near the thumb. It had been treated. The skin was clean and there was no blood, but the mark was there. She set down the tray, without speaking. He heard the particular sound of the plates. What did you bring? Grilled fish, lemon rice, salad, and the soup you mentioned last week. I made it this morning. He nodded slowly. He did not move toward the tray. You made the soup, he said. Yes. You remembered. You said it was something your mother made. Another silence. Longer this time. She was about to excuse herself when he spoke. My mother would have liked you, he said. It was a statement with no clear emotion in it. It could have been a compliment. It could have been something else entirely. Thank you, she said, because it was the safest response. She would have said you have a practical soul, he continued. She said that about people she respected. Naomi looked at his hand, at the cut, at the careful way he was not acknowledging it. I hope she was right, she said. She left and closed the door behind her. In the hallway, she stopped for a moment with her back against the wall and stayed there until she was sure of herself again. The man in that room had done things she did not want to know in detail. The man in that room had power over people's lives in ways that courts had spent years trying to quantify and had never fully managed. The man in that room had a cut on his hand from a morning she was not allowed to ask about, in a house where certain things happened in certain rooms at certain times, and you did not look directly at them. The man in that room had remembered that she existed well enough to note that he had mentioned his mother's soup. She pushed herself off the wall and went to check on the linen. By the 10th week, several things had changed without any of them being announced. The first was that Dario began leaving her alone in the morning corridor when Vincent walked to his study. Previously, Dario had always been present in the house during Vincent's movements. Now, 3 or 4 mornings a week, Dario was elsewhere, and Naomi was simply there in the normal course of her duties. The second was that Vincent had begun speaking to her slightly more than was strictly necessary. Nothing personal. Nothing that could be characterized as friendship. But where before he had given instructions or asked operational questions, now he occasionally said something beyond the task. A comment about the weather based on what he'd heard from the open window, an observation about something in the morning news that one of the staff read aloud to him, a single dry remark about a visitor. The third was the most difficult to name because it was not a behavior but a quality in the air. He had begun, in some way she could not quite document, to trust her. Not in a way that made her safer. In a way that made her situation more complicated. In the 11th week, Celeste came again. This time, she came in the evening. She was shown to the sitting room. Naomi was asked by Dario to serve and then to leave the room, explicit this time, where before it had been assumption. She served.
She poured.
She left. She was in the kitchen 20 minutes later when she heard movement in the hallway. Celeste appeared in the kitchen doorway. "He says you make good tea," Celeste said. Naomi looked at her. "I can make a pot. I don't actually want tea." Celeste sat down at the kitchen table without being invited. "I want to know how long you've been here." 11 weeks. "And before this?" "Private households." "And before that?" Naomi continued, wiping the counter. "I'd need to understand the reason for the question before I answered it." Celeste smiled slightly. "That's a very specific kind of answer." "I'm a very specific kind of person." Celeste looked at her steadily. "Are you aware of who you work for?" Naomi set down the cloth. "I work for Mr. Caruso." "Yes." "And you're aware of the context?" "I'm aware that he's a private individual with a household." Celeste's smile stayed where it was, but its quality shifted. "If anyone in this house ever asked you to do something that made you uncomfortable, you would have recourse. There are people you could contact." "Thank you," Naomi said. "I'll bear that in mind." Celeste stood. She looked at Naomi for a moment with something that was not quite pity and not quite admiration. Then she walked back toward the sitting room. Naomi went back to wiping the counter. She understood what had just happened. Someone in a position of official or quasi-official power had tried to recruit her as a source of information. Had been careful about it. No threat, no pressure, phrased as protection. She was meant to feel the offer as safety.
She did not tell Dario about it.
She did not tell Vincent about it. She wrote nothing down. She filed it in the same place as the card. What she thought about, that night, was not the investigator's offer. It was the look on Vincent's face, which was, of course, blank. Always blank in the way a face is blank when the eyes do not move. When Celeste was in the house. The particular stillness that was different from his ordinary stillness. The stillness of someone who has been circled for years and has learned to make the act of waiting look like nothing at all. She understood that stillness. Not from the same place he did. But she understood it. 2 days later, Vincent summoned her to the study again. She knocked. He told her to enter. He was standing at the window, facing it, not looking out, the way he often stood at windows.
"She spoke to you," he said.
"Yes." "In the kitchen?" "Yes." "What did she say?" Naomi thought about this for a moment. "She asked how long I'd been here. She asked if I was aware of the context of my employment. She said I would have recourse if I were asked to do something uncomfortable." He stood very still. "And you said?" I thanked her. Another pause. Longer. "You didn't tell Dario." "I didn't think it was necessary." "Why?" "Because she didn't ask me to do anything." She offered something. There's a difference. He turned away from the window, toward her. His gray eyes found her approximate position with the accuracy that still, 11 weeks in, surprised her slightly. What did you want to do? He asked. The question caught her off guard because it was not a question she had expected.
About what?
When she spoke to you, what did you want to do? She thought about her mother's treatment. She thought about the sound she had heard in the garden on the 3rd week. She thought about the cut on his hand and the jacket that had been changed. I wanted to finish wiping the counter, she said. He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile. It was the suggestion of one, the structural beginning of an expression that then held back, as if the musculature for full ease had gone slightly stiff from years of disuse.
You can go, he said.
She went. A week after that, Dario told her that Vincent had asked for the household to be prepared for a gathering. 12 people. Saturday evening. Dinner, followed by a meeting in the East Parlor. Naomi coordinated the menu, the table settings, the service staff, 2 people brought in for the evening from the agency. She briefed them on the house rules, the timings, the particular requirements of a room where the host navigated by sound and habit, and the placement of every object mattered. The gathering had a quality she did not try to name. The 12 people who arrived were varied in the way that rooms of power tend to be varied, different faces, different suits, different accents, but a shared understanding of what kind of room they were in and what was expected of them. The food was eaten with the particular forced lightness of people conducting serious business inside a social forum. Vincent sat at the head of the table. He ate without any of the accommodations that might draw attention to his condition. He poured his own water. He located his silverware by placement memory. When someone passed a dish without warning, he sensed the heat of it before it reached him, or the slight shift in ambient air, and tracked it well enough to receive it. Naomi moved through the room without eye contact, which was her professional default. She refilled glasses, removed plates at the correct interval, replaced the bread basket. She was, in the vocabulary of the room, invisible, except that on 2 occasions, as she moved between the head of the table and the sideboard, she was aware of Vincent's face tracking her slightly. Not looking. Tracking. The small tilt that indicated his sense of where she was. No one else at the table would have noticed. She was not sure if she was supposed to. After the dinner, after the gathering moved to the East Parlor, after the service staff had gone and the kitchen was restored, she sat at the kitchen table for 15 minutes. She was not particularly tired. She was giving herself time to think, which was something she had to do deliberately in this house because deliberate thinking was the only kind that felt safe. What she thought was, something is happening here that is not in the job description. Not something dangerous, precisely.
Not something she could point to.
Something slower. Something that required more honesty than she was entirely comfortable extending to a situation this complicated. She went to bed and set her alarm for 6. In the 13th week, Vincent's health changed. It was not dramatic. She noticed it first in the quality of his movements, a slight excess of deliberateness, as if he were concentrating on things he usually did automatically. She noticed it in the morning, when he came to breakfast later than usual and sat for a moment before reaching for his coffee. She said nothing. She had learned, very thoroughly, that nothing accelerated trust in that house faster than the discipline of not offering help that hadn't been asked for. But she paid attention. On the 3rd morning, he didn't come to the table at all. Dario brought a tray up. That afternoon, the household doctor, a compact man named Ferraro who arrived without appointment, was in the house for 40 minutes. He left with the same face he had arrived with, which told her nothing. That evening, she brought Vincent's dinner to the study. He was in the chair by the window. The doctor came, she said. I know the doctor came, he said. I was there. How are you feeling? He turned toward her. That's the first personal question you've asked me. She thought about it. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. A pause. I'm tired. It's a recurring thing. It passes. She set the tray on the side table. I can come back for the tray in an hour, or you can leave it outside the door. Sit down, he said. It was not a request. It was not threatening. It was simply an instruction with a different quality from the operational ones. She looked at the chair across from him. She sat. He was quiet for a moment. You know what I am, he said. I know some things about your reputation, she said. And you've stayed. I've stayed. Why? She thought about the honest version. My mother is ill. The salary here covers her treatment. That was the primary reason in the beginning. In the beginning. Things are more complicated now. He didn't ask her to say how. He let it rest where she'd placed it. I grew up, he said after a while, watching my father manage certain things in certain ways. I understood from a young age what kind of world it was. Not the world other people described. The actual one.
He paused.
I chose to enter it with my eyes open. That must be a strange thing to say now, she said. He went very still. Then, slowly, he let out a breath that had something in it she had not heard from him before. It was not quite a laugh. It was the exhale that comes after a long time of not acknowledging something. Yes, he said. It is. They sat in that room for another 20 minutes and did not speak again, and it was the least uncomfortable 20 minutes she had spent in that house. She took the tray when he was done. She went back to the kitchen. She washed the plates herself, which was not strictly her responsibility that evening, but which felt like the right use of her hands. In the 15th week, the legal situation changed. She didn't know the details. She knew the shape of it from the behavior of the house, the tightening of something invisible, the extra security rotation, Dario's particular quality of contained urgency. 2 men she had not seen before arrived and were in the east parlor with Dario for 3 hours. Vincent was in his study. She kept to the work. She cleaned the rooms she was supposed to clean. She prepared the meals. She stocked the shelves and maintained the schedule and was, to all appearances, precisely what her employment contract described. But she was watching. What she watched was this. The people who moved through that house with authority and purpose treated Vincent with a quality of respect that was not entirely voluntary. They were loyal, some of them, but their loyalty had the shape of people who had measured their options and selected the one with the least danger. It was not the loyalty of love or belief. It was the loyalty of calculation. It struck her, that week, that she might be the only person in the house who was there for a reason that had nothing to do with him specifically. She had taken the job for her mother. She had stayed because the money was consistent. Her continued presence had no political dimension. No angle. She did not yet understand what that made her to him. She found out in the 16th week. On a Thursday morning, Dario came to her in the kitchen. He was carrying a document in a manila envelope and he set it on the table in front of her, without preamble. He wants you to read this, Dario said. She looked at the envelope. What is it? He wants you to read it, Dario said again. She opened it. It was a legal document. Formal. Correctly executed. She read it twice to be certain she understood. It was a marriage proposal. Not a romantic one. The document was explicit about that. It was a legal and financial arrangement. If she agreed to marry him, she would become legally entitled to a significant property settlement and a monthly income regardless of the duration or outcome of the arrangement, which could be dissolved at either party's discretion after a period of no less than 2 years. Her mother's medical costs would be covered in full, indefinitely, by a separate trust established for that purpose. In exchange, she would remain in the household. She would continue her duties. Her presence would be, legally and in public record, that of a wife, a status that had certain protective implications for him under the current legal circumstances. She sat with it for a long time. Then she went to the study and knocked. Come in, he said. She entered. She stood in front of the desk. She set the document on it. You read it, he said. It was not a question. I need you to explain something, she said. What? Why me? He sat back slightly. Because I know what you are. You said that before. You mean it differently now. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. You've been in this house for 16 weeks. Every day. In every room. You've seen things you were not supposed to notice, and you have not used them. You've been approached by someone with a reason to want information, and you did not provide any. You have no connections to any of the people I work with and no interest in any of the structures I'm part of. You have a genuine reason to be here that has nothing to do with me. She waited. That, he said, is extraordinarily rare. It's not a qualification for a wife, she said. Under normal circumstances, no. He laced his fingers together. These are not normal circumstances. She thought about the legal situation she had only partly understood. She thought about Celeste and the card with the federal investigator's name. She thought about the gathering of 12 people and what had been discussed in the East Parlor. She thought about the cut on his hand and the morning she had not asked about.
If I said no, she said.
You would be given a generous severance and a reference, he said immediately. And that would be the end of it. She believed him, which was itself notable. She had spent 16 weeks learning to read the texture of what he said, and she believed him. I need to think, she said. Take the time you need. She took 3 days. She called her mother. Not to ask her opinion, her mother did not know the specifics and Naomi did not intend to share them, but because she needed to hear her mother's voice, which was a specific kind of anchor. Her mother told her about the dialysis, about the nurse who was kind, about the neighbor's dog that kept getting into the yard. Her mother laughed once during the call, at something small, and Naomi held that laugh in her chest for a while after she hung up. On the 3rd day, she went to the study. Yes, she said. He turned toward her voice. You understand what you're agreeing to. I understand what the document says, she said. I'm less certain about everything else. That's honest. It seemed important to be. He nodded slowly. The paperwork will be done by end of next week. Fine. She turned to leave. Naomi, he said. She stopped. I am aware, he said, of what I'm asking you to accept. The full weight of it. She stood with her back to him. I know you are, she said. That's partly why I said yes. She went back to work. The marriage was small. Legal, witnessed by Dario and the household lawyer, held in the same room where he had first listened to her footsteps. No ceremony. No guests. A brief formal exchange of the required statements, the signing of documents, the handshake that was also, in its way, a kind of compact. She wore a good dress that she had bought with her own money. He wore a dark jacket. Dario served champagne that no one drank. In the weeks that followed, almost nothing in the household changed, and almost everything did. She was still the housekeeper in practical terms. She managed the staff, the schedule, the meals. She still knocked before entering any room. She still did not offer help that hadn't been asked for. She still moved through the house with the particular quiet that she had brought with her on the first day. But she slept in the larger wing now, in a room 2 doors down from his. She sat at the dinner table across from him rather than serving it. She attended, occasionally, certain things she had not attended before, a meeting with his lawyer, a telephone call regarding property. And she began slowly to understand more. The federal investigation was real and ongoing. The legal arrangement had a specific purpose within it, a matter of spousal testimony and the protection it afforded under the applicable statute. She understood this. She had always understood that the document had a legal function. What she had not entirely predicted was the other thing. The morning she came to breakfast and found him sitting with a book, a talking book, playing softly through a small device, and he turned it off not to indicate that she should leave, but to indicate that she could stay if she wanted to. She poured coffee and sat.
He didn't speak.
She didn't speak. The room was quiet in the way that requires comfort between people to sustain. She was aware that the situation had many layers she was still working through. The moral ones were not simple. The arrangement had been made from necessity on both sides. The man across the table had lived a life she could not fully endorse and several parts of which she actively found troubling. But she also noticed carefully what he was, not what the files said. What she had watched for 16 weeks and then through a marriage and beyond. He was precise about what he promised. He had promised a fair arrangement, a separate trust for her mother's care, and the right to leave after 2 years. He had delivered all of it without her needing to ask twice. He did not lie to her. He withheld things and she withheld things, and they both understood the architecture of what they were not saying. But when he did speak, it was true. He was completely alone in a way that had nothing to do with blindness or household staff. He was alone in the way that years of a certain kind of power creates, a room around a person with no windows, no entry except through calculation. She was not trying to fix him.
She was clear with herself about that.
She was not a story about a woman who saves a difficult man. She had her own life and her own reasons and her own carefully maintained privacy inside this arrangement. But she noticed. 6 months into the marriage, on an ordinary evening in October, she came into the sitting room with tea, and he was at the window he always stood at, facing the sound of the trees, and she set the tea on the table, and he said, without turning, "Tell me what the garden looks like right now." She looked out. The light was going. The box hedge along the south wall was dark green, nearly black in the evening. The large oak near the gate had turned, and some of the leaves were still attached, copper and amber, and some had come down and lay in layers on the grass. She told him. Not elaborately. Not with flourish. She told him the colors and the quality of the light, and the way the leaves had come down unevenly, more on the east side where the wind ran. He stood very still and listened. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then, "Thank you." She poured the tea and left the room. She sat in the kitchen for a little while. She thought about the thing that had happened in that room, which was not large and was not dramatic and did not resolve anything, but which sat in her differently from the way most things in that house sat in her. She thought about her mother, who was doing better. The trust was functioning. The treatments were paid. The nurse her mother liked was still there. She thought about the sound she had heard in the garden in the 3rd week. She thought about the card with the federal investigator's name. She thought about the people who moved through this house, and what they were loyal to, and what they were afraid of. She thought about a man who had chosen to enter a certain world with his eyes open and had then, some years later, lost the ability to see anything at all, and whether that was irony or consequence or simply what had happened. She thought about her own situation, which was compromised, which required things of her she was still negotiating with herself, which had costs she had not finished counting. She did not come to a conclusion about any of it. The honest answer was that there was no clean conclusion available, and she had enough experience with the actual texture of life to know that the absence of a clean conclusion was not a failure of thinking. It was just the shape of certain things. In the 8th month, Celeste came for the last time. Naomi did not know it was the last time. Celeste arrived in the afternoon, was shown to the sitting room, and this time Naomi was asked to stay. She sat slightly to the side of the room, in a chair that was functionally adjacent to the space rather than part of the center of it. Celeste looked at her when she entered and did not look at her again. The conversation between Vincent and Celeste was not heated. It was conducted in the register of two people who have been engaged in a long-form exchange that both know is ending. "We are closing this particular avenue of inquiry," Celeste said at one point. "I would think so," Vincent said. "There are other avenues." "There are always other avenues." Celeste looked at her hands briefly. "You understand that this doesn't mean the matter is concluded." "Nothing is ever concluded," Vincent said. "You know that." When Celeste left, Naomi rose to walk her to the door. In the entrance hall, Celeste stopped and looked at her. "You made a significant choice," Celeste said. "Yes," Naomi said. "I hope it serves you well." It was said without menace, without the measuring quality of their first exchange. It was said the way someone says something to a person who made a decision they do not entirely understand but can no longer affect.
"Thank you," Naomi said.
She closed the door. She stood in the entrance hall for a moment. Above her, the light came through the high window at the angle of late afternoon, making the wooden floor warm and pale. She went back to the sitting room. Vincent was in his chair. "She's gone," Naomi said. "I heard the door," he said. She sat. Not in the adjacent chair this time. In the chair across from him, the chair from the dinner table that had been moved here weeks ago and that she now used without thinking about it. He turned slightly toward her. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked at him. The stillness of his face, the careful way he held himself in the chair, the hands that were always pressing something slightly, as if testing weight. "I think so," she said. He nodded.
They sat for a while.
The room was quiet. Outside, the wind was doing something to the leaves in the garden and they could both hear it, and for a moment that was all there was. Two people in a complicated room, listening to the same sound. There was no resolution in it. There was nothing explained or forgiven or fully named. There was just the sound of the garden, and the light from the window, and the tea going cold on the table between them. And the particular quality of a silence that is not empty.